Welcome into the Kings Beat podcast. I am James Ham, Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. We are, of course, a Blue Wire podcast. Joining me today, Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast. Brenden, how are you?
I am doing well, James. I am ready to overreact to 2 games of an NBA season. That's what we're here for. 0-2, the sky is falling, according to Kings fans. And no, in all honesty, I think there is some valid concerns, but very early in the season, I'm ready to give some takeaways.
It's funny you said the sky is falling, and I literally have written a piece for the Kings Beat that will go up in just a little while after the podcast that like the sky is falling, and I give proper quotes for it. It's Henny Penny, who is better known as Chicken Little.
Okay,
Who
I
that's
recognize Chicken Little.
that's where that quote comes from. The sky is falling. I have to go tell the king. And basically, what happens is exactly what's happened here. An acorn fell out of a tree and donked him on top of the head, and so he thought the sky was falling. And this is the equivalent of an acorn falling out of a tree. It's just so. Anyway, yeah, pretty wild. We are, of course, watching. We're doing this live during Football Sunday. It's not something we typically do, but with a game happening yesterday, Sean is away for the weekend. He's actually moving and got some stuff going on, so we can't. We will not see Mr. Cunningham drop by and see us. But Brenden and I can do a pretty good, I think, walkthrough session here to help some people cope with the dramatic 0-2 start for the Sacramento Kings. Let's start with the basics here. Number one, let's just hit some of the big topics first. Brenden, I'm sure you're glued to the TV just like I was last night. Neither one of us flew to LA. So for those of you out there who are wondering why, the question about why Keon Ellis did not play in the game, why it actually wasn't asked of Mike Brown, I'm going to tell you 2 things. Number one, it very well could have been asked of Mike Brown, and we haven't got the story yet from Jason Anderson. And number 2, when we get quotes from a team's PR, like we do from the Lakers after last night's game, very, very seldom is it every single quote that was given during the night. So it's very possible that there was a quote. There's very possible that Jason Anderson asked that question, but it's also possible that Jason had so many other questions because LeBron James went crazy and scored a whole bunch of points in the fourth quarter and looked like a 25-year-old dude dominating a game. But Brenden, let's start with the Keon Ellis thing because I kind of want to get that out of the way. I kind of want to get some of the Kevin Huerter stuff out of the way before we really dive into the game, because I think that's sort of the hot button issues that we got going right now.
Yeah, I think it definitely is. I'll say just to start, like Keon not playing a single minute was definitely shocking to me. And on the post-game stuff, like I went back and listened to all the post-game stuff that happened yesterday, not locker room, obviously, but just on the podium, nothing asked about it. Like you said, kind of a lot asked about LeBron's big game or the Kings media team that were the other people there were a little more focused on Domas tying Larry Bird for 10th all time in triple doubles, De'Aaron hitting his 703 of his career and sort of some things like that. But it doesn't make much sense to me. Mike Brown has been very transparent since the start of training camp, really. And as we've gotten closer to the regular season, that he doesn't have a great grasp on his rotation at this point. And I appreciate the transparency. There's also part of me that's like, I don't know how much you should really be saying this, Mike, but fair enough. And like I said, I like the honesty. It's been apparent, in game 1, you see starters, main guys, DeRozan, 43 minutes, Keegan, 43, 37 for Fox, 38 for Domas. Game 2, Fox plays 41, Keegan plays 40, 37 for DeMar and 37 for Domas. And the bench is just hardly giving you anything. It's really Malik Monk and Trey Lyles. Game 1, you had Keon Ellis out there as well. But against the Lakers, they have a huge lineup. There's a portion where, Jordan McLaughlin got his first run in that second game against the Lakers. And the Kings are rolling out McLaughlin, Fox, Malik, Trey Lyles, and Demonis Sabonis, while the Lakers have Gabe Vincent, Max Christie, LeBron James at the 3, Anthony Davis, and Jackson Hayes. So I understand the logic of with the Lakers, it's really the forwards and the bigs that are the larger issue. And I think that held true yesterday. But I still think for the most part, like Keon deserves to be out there. You've seen him be a 40% three-point shooter since he's come into the league. If you go back to his time with Stockton as well and what he did last year. And defensively, you know what he provides. So I don't think he had a great preseason necessarily. And I'm not somebody that thinks he needs to be playing ridiculous minutes every single night. But I think that he for sure belongs in the rotation. And it sticks out even more when there's a clear adjustment period trying to figure out what can I get from my bench. And Keon, to me, feels like the one where you know what you would get.
Okay, so I think it's interesting because, again, like to kind of set the stage, Keon Ellis was a starter all the way through preseason. He started the last 15 games of the season. I think the Kings went 7-8 over that stretch, so it's not like they set the world on fire. But like the conversations I've had around the team were pretty clear. Like Keon Ellis did not stand out in preseason all that much, and if he did, if he showed up and just outright won the job without Kevin Huerter there, then and made the decision easy, that would have been one thing. But that's not what happened. And so basically he left a door open for Kevin Huerter to return. And like at the end of the day, like Kevin Huerter has more experience. He is a better offensive player. He's not as good defensively, but he's also a bigger player and a player that draws more attention from the opposition. And so those are some of the things that Kevin does. But what I've seen from Keon is like he just didn't look the same all through preseason. And I'm not sure, I don't want to be too hard on him because I think he worked hard just like everybody else did. I also think he came in and maybe was a little bit like overworked, like he did too much work because he looked in preseason a step slow. He wasn't fighting through screens like he normally does. He wasn't able to, he was fouling everybody. When he did get his breakaway dunks, it was almost like he was labored to go up for a two-hand dunk. And it wasn't just one time, it was like 3 or 4 times he was on a breakaway and looked like he was barely able to extend up and just didn't look like he had pop. And so I'm looking at Keon Ellis, I'm looking at what's happening here with Kevin Huerter, and then Mike just decides to switch like pass, like right at the end of training camp. And again, I don't know all that went into that decision, but I do know that if you're a coach and you look over and you have a guy who's played 6 years in the league and you have another guy who's played roughly 50 games in the league, a lot of times you go with a more experienced guy, especially when you have a glaring issue in your starting lineup that 2 of your players don't shoot a lot of threes. And in the modern NBA, spacing is king, and you got to figure it out. So I don't think Keon did anything wrong, but I also don't think Keon did anything right that just made him a no-brainer start. And so you get into the regular season, you get through game 1, and I think Mike being honest with us and telling us that, he doesn't know how to put his arms around this team. If you remember, Brennan, during the first uh, the first media session before game 1, I asked Mike, "Are you going to rely on what you know, since you haven't been able to sort of put your arms around this thing?" And I think it was telling. I think the answer is yes. He's relying on what he knows. And most coaches in the NBA, when things are wonky and everything isn't working yet, you tend to pare down, get the core right, and then expand. And so I understand him dropping to 8 players. And I'm just really surprised that Keon Ellis isn't one of those 8. And so I'm with you, but I also understand the mentality of what's happening here. He's not even really playing. If you look at the numbers, he's not even really playing an 8-man rotation. He's playing like a 7.5-man rotation with Alex Len playing 10 minutes. And so what we're seeing is a contraction, so he can sort of build the chemistry, build the on-court chemistry between this team. And then I expect him to expand back out and start peppering in some of these other guys. But in the meantime, you got to get Trey Lyles up to speed. You got to get Kevin Huerter up to speed. And you've got to get those guys up to speed with DeMar DeRozan and the rest of the changes that have been made during the offseason before you can kind of move forward with a bigger group of players. At least that's my read on it. And maybe I'm crazy, but that's kind of where I'm at, Brennan.
Yeah, I think that if you're going to run 7, 8 guys, that those ones that you're putting out there consistently should be pretty good and reliable. And I think that, as you touched on a little bit there, like Kevin and Trey Lyles both returning to form. Now, I thought Herter actually played better in that Lakers game for sure than the Minnesota one. Like you kind of asked me before, his deflections coming into the game, and he did all right in that aspect, second on the team. And offensively, 4 of 7 from 3. That's what you like to see. I think Kevin is a little overhated by the fan base after a tough stretch to end last season that eventually ended with an injury there, but he still has a lot of offensive aspects that he brings to this team. And last year, their best starting lineup was still with Kevin Huerter, even though they got a decent amount of run with Keon Ellis sitting there. But I think that there's clear conditioning stuff that still needs to come back a little bit there. Part of why he was phased out of the lineup a little bit throughout the course of last season, and Chris Duarte even got about 5 starts or so, was because of the defense. A lot of times last year it was first play of the game, let's get Kevin Huerter involved in an action. I thought Minnesota did that a little bit, and that's still going to be par for the course here. But Trey is the one that stood out to me even more so. Came back from that groin injury, didn't get to participate in camp or preseason, and he's looked really rough to me. Now, I will say I think that's just part of the process coming back from a groin injury specifically, where movement can be a little bit restricted or just complicated at times. But both of these games, it felt very extreme of going at Trey Lyles for both of these teams. And it worked out well for them. But for the most part, like they had a chance to win both of these games. We're talking about a 4-point loss and a 2-point loss.
The total is 6 points.
6 points between two games against, what was the best team in the West last year, and a team that has, call the Lakers what you want, but LeBron James had 16 points in the beginning of the third quarter while the Lakers went on a 21-0 run. They still have this ridiculous talent on their roster. So it's not like, to go back to the sky is falling. It's just an acorn still in my mind, but I do think that it's a decent size acorn, and that it still needs to, you really need to get Kevin and Trey back into form. But my follow-up question for you would be, is while Mike Brown, like we've talked about, clearly trying to figure it out, how much do you feel like, it's a competitive Western Conference, you need to win every single game, you don't know what the margins are going to be at the end of the year, but how much of it is that right now should be the time where you're trying and throwing Jordan McLaughlin out there for more than 3 minutes, or I don't know, I guess, what your really options are on this bench, but like see what Keon has more in that game. Do you feel like this should be the time where you're experimenting?
Well, I think before you can experiment, you have to get it right. I think there's a big difference between, let's just choose Isaac Jones, right? Like, I think that I would have liked to have seen at some point Isaac Jones on Nas Reed, right? And the second time they play Minnesota, maybe we do. The third time they play Minnesota, which is like November 24th, maybe we do. But it's really tough to take a undrafted two-way player and put him on an NBA court when the other 4 guys aren't moving in unison. You know what I mean? So having specialty players, and I'm gonna kind of lump Keon Ellis into the like specialty player group. I think he can get out of the specialty player group. I think he can be a starter for this team. But at the same time, the specialty player group are players that are limited in what they do. They're people that have like 1 or 2 major skills that you really are asking them to do on a court because the other guys have them. The other guys are like, hey, we got you. You don't need to create off the dribble. We've got De'Aaron Fox. We've got Domantas Sabonis. We've got DeMar DeRozan. You don't need to go in there and be like an elite rebounder. We've got Domantas Sabonis. We don't need you to be a post player. We've got Domantas Sabonis. We don't need you to start pulling up from mid-range jumpers. We've got DeMar DeRozan to do that. So, like, it's easier to filter in these secondary pieces when everything is moving the right way and everyone's kind of flowing together. And I think the first thing you have to do is get that happening. You have to have the flow of the team going the right way, the flow of the offense, everything going the right way. And then you start sprinkling in these other things. And this is something that typically you would do during training camp, but the Trey Lyles injury and again the Kevin Huerter injury just did not allow Mike Brown to do this. Kevin got cleared for contact on like the Friday before the season started. Like, what are you supposed to do? There's not a lot you can do. Trey Lyles got cleared for 5-on-5 like 2 days before the season started. Like, he hadn't been on the court at all. And we talked about it's a groin injury, right? So there's one thing for Kevin Huerter to run around. The only thing Kevin Huerter wasn't allowed to do was take contact, right? Everything else Kevin was allowed to do. He's allowed to run. He's allowed to shoot. He's allowed to go through the drills. He'd been allowed to shoot for like 2 or 3 months. And just so people know, Devin Carter has already been cleared to shoot. Devin Carter's out there shooting. I talked to somebody within the walls on, let me see, what was it? Opening night. And they said, yeah, Devin's already been cleared to shoot. And the hope is that you can ramp him up physically so when he does get cleared from the labral tear, that he's ready to step right onto the court like Kevin was. And they said that Kevin did a great job of being physically and mentally ready to step on the court as soon as he could. And as soon as he is cleared for contact, that was just a step he had to go through where he had to, again, learn how to take a hit again, learn how to go for a rebound without hurting your shoulder. So I still like Brenden. I think it would be nice if they could dabble. And I think there are teams out there. What do we have? Who's the team that's out there running 12 dudes? Oh, the Warriors. The Warriors are dabbling, but they're dabbling with like 12 veterans. They're not, I mean, you can, I guess, Trace Jackson Davis and Pajemski, you can say they're second year players, but overall, they're still super young players, right? I mean, they're still veteran players. The rest of the team, it's a Buddy Hield coming off the bench. It's, Moses Moody has been in their system for 3 or 4 years. All of the players that they have are kind of flowing. That's not the case with the Kings. They haven't had like their core together at all, but now they're trying to, build that as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that we've seen, again, early, don't know, probably going to say that a lot throughout this pod, but I think that we've still even seen signs of like, what is this identity supposed to be for this team? And one of the clear ones to me is you shot 29 threes in the first game, which tied your season low for all of last season. And then the next game against the Lakers, you get up 44 threes. And it's like, all right, well, where is the healthy balance here? I think it's around the 35 mark from what I've kind of gathered that they really would be targeting there. But that seems like something that's still getting figured out. They're getting to the free throw line a lot, which was not a thing last year. 35 free throw attempts in game one, 25 in this game. How do you work that into your offense? And what ideal lineups? Trey Lyles played the backup 5 a little bit in particularly that first game. You go more Alex Len in the second. So I think that there are obvious things to still iron out with that main group, but really even just figuring out what your identity is and the ideal way that you're going to play basketball on a night-to-night basis is something that has to get figured out. And we do know that their staples are the same as they were last year. There's some slight changes. I have them here on offense. The 5 are pace, space, paint touches, ball reversals, and new one this year is crashing the glass. We've seen them emphasize a lot getting to the offensive glass throughout preseason, and that's carried over into the regular season. The Lakers actually killed them in that aspect yesterday, and that was a big difference. 5 staples on the defensive end: communication, ball pressure. New one is protecting the paint, and then multiple efforts and physical without fouling. So like similar style, but I still think the identity of this team is somewhat TBD because DeRozan seamlessly fits is the idea. And I think that we've seen that offensively, but there's some fundamental differences when you just drop in a future Hall of Famer.
Oh no, I totally agree, Brendan. And like, look, when it comes to like who they are, I think that that's like the identity crisis that this team is going to have. And like, look, they're going to have an identity crisis multiple times during the season. That's typical. But what we need to do, we do need to see is like, who are you? And I think the biggest thing we knew from 2 years ago, when we knew that they were an incredible offensive team, they were a bad defensive team, but they're also resilient as hell, right? They kept coming back in games. They never lost, more than 3 in a row. They always had, like, anytime you thought that they were slipping, they would get some random big win over a team that you didn't think that they had any chance against. And we need them to find that identity quickly, because spent the entire season last year waiting for the identity to show up, and it never did. They became a better defensive team at the end of the year, but they weren't a great offensive team. And like, they just kept going back and forth. As of right now, it's super small sample size. The Kings are like 8th in the league in offensive rating. They're 10th in the league in pace. Like, these are things that we're going to start looking at more and more as we go along, as the sample size gets bigger. But for right now, I'm with you. I need to see an identity. And I think, even the opener, I didn't think they played all that well. They weren't horrible, but they couldn't shoot the ball at all. They still scored 115 points. They scored 127 in game 2. So the offense isn't so much an issue. Maybe crunch time offense, we've seen like just a single guy out. Like DeMar DeRozan's trying to figure it all out with a new team. Like, he's the guy who's forced a crazy amount of bad shots and bad plays in the first 2 games of the season. Like, it again, people want to heap on Kevin Huerter for his and we'll get to this, his negative 29 plus minus in the game last night. They want to bury Kevin, but like, look at the plays, the individual plays. Look at how many forced shots you remember. There was a play last night where, things are spinning out of control completely, and DeRozan had a wide open either Keegan Murray or Kevin Huerter in the right corner, and instead he took a contested 17-foot jump shot and missed. And yeah, he's a great jump shooter, and those are going to go in a good portion of the time. But in that situation, you need a high percentage shot, and that means you either need to get to the line, or and that's another, like, how do you allow a 21-0 run when you are a team that can get to the free throw line at any moment?
Right.
And that's because you just didn't take the ball to the rack. You didn't go force the issue and go get to the free throw line and stop what was happening and break it, right? So I think there are a lot of problems that we saw pop up, but these are also like early season problems. I would have liked to have seen it work out in preseason where they cleared up some of this stuff, but that's just not the reality this team was facing. This team was facing the fact that 2 of their, what we now know are top 7 rotational players, just weren't available. They weren't available. They were injured. And so now we're seeing some clunkiness and some weirdness. And to be honest, I expected it, and I expected them to, one of these games, lose by more than, 2 or 4. I expect it to be ugly. And sure, you can say, well, they had to come back in order to make it close, but still, like, it was 2 points, a 2-point game with 55 seconds left. Like, they had a shot in this game, but their defense let them down again. They allowed a wide open 3 by Anthony Davis, and he busted them, and that's why he lost the game.
Yeah, I mean, if that doesn't go down and the Kings happen to get a shot on the other end, like, we're talking about their resilience again, like you mentioned that they had a couple years ago, still fighting through. And I think being competitive in these games, there is like somewhat of a silver lining there, because you gave up big runs in both instances, which for what it's worth is something that I thought DeMar would really help with, that in an issue last year that they gave up extended runs where I'm like, this should probably be an 8-0 run. And all of a sudden it's 17 or 21 out of somewhere. And I thought DeMar's ability to get to the line, slow everything down in those moments would help. Didn't really rear its face yesterday, but I think that they did continue to fight. It's just defensively being able to execute. And the other thing I would point out is you have 2 of the guys that are supposed to be some of the best clutch scorers in the league, and you lost back-to-back clutch games. So again, 2 games. And like you said, I think the defense was more so the issue rather than the offense itself, and typical growing pains and all that. But, you got those clutch guys and you weren't able to pull it out in the clutch situations.
No, I totally agree. I mean, De'Aaron Fox missed 2 11-foot jumpers. He was tremendous in the end of the fourth quarter. The third quarter, he hit the 2 threes. And I think that's something we should also point out. Like, the Kings had no separation from that team at all in the third quarter. But Fox hit a pair of threes right at the end of the third quarter to make it a 9-point game. So I think a lot of people like, oh, like, Kings got this, right? And then it turned so quickly. And so, like, look, these guys in the clutch, you do have 2 of the greatest clutch players in the game. And I don't think either one of them have been particularly clutch so far. And that's okay. Like, again, it's early in the season. They're trying to learn who's taking what shot, and like, sort of whose turn it is. And until they figure that out, it can be a little odd, a little weird, but overall, like I think offensively they've been really solid.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say real quick to DeMar's credit yesterday is that he hit, I think one of them, his foot was on the line, but
Oh, yeah.
similarly to De'Aaron hitting those 2 threes at the end of the third, keep that in. DeMar had, I want to say it's 3 straight possessions. Again, 1 foot on the line on one of them, but looked like 3 threes, ended up being 2 that really, really did end up keeping them in that game.
Yeah, it was wild. I think they actually in the fourth quarter they had 2 threes where their foot was on the line, and it was only a 2-pointer. The one was, well, I know Trey Lyles had one at one point in the game, early in the game, but then late in the game, I swear there was one other where it's either Keegan or someone else had their foot on the line, and it was only a 2. And again, those little things matter when you end up losing by 4 points, and they totally do. So, all right. So everybody knows we are doing a live show today. Thanks for joining us. If you're here, if you're watching it back, we don't usually give a lot of notice that we're doing a live show, and it's usually because we're never sure exactly what time we're starting, because we all have like floating schedules. But if you don't mind, give us a thumbs up wherever you're listening to your pods. Give us a rating and review. Jump on board with the King's Beat. Go to thekingsbeat.com, become a premium subscriber so you support what we do here, all that good stuff. Let's get to like the weirdness of the game, because like again, I know like fans, I'm not going to tell you how to fan. Like, be emotional, be fun, like whatever. But also be rational if you can. And I know that that's not a good thing to ask, because for fans to be rational. But there's this weird, crappy thing that happened in the game last night, and that is that LeBron James went absolutely, like, he went plaid. Like, he was so incredible for a 3.5-minute stretch, and like he scored 16 of the Lakers' 21 points, and they ran over the Kings. In one little snippet, the Kings were up 9 or up 7, whatever it was, at the end of the third, and then next thing you know, they're down 14. So I guess 21. That means they were up 7 coming into the fourth quarter. Yeah, it's 94-87. And then LeBron went crazy. And while LeBron was going crazy, poor Kevin Huerter just happened to be on the court. So when you look at a box score, you see how many points someone scored, how many rebounds, how many, 4 of 7 from 3, 5 and 9 from the field, whatever it is. You're looking at someone's stats, and then you see this gigantic number hiding over to the side, which is plus minus, and a player throws up a negative 29 in a game. I think everybody just wants to point a finger and say it's all Kevin Huerter's fault. And like most of the time, that's not the case. There are times where plus minus like matches the eye test. I've seen it a bunch of times where you're like, okay, every time I see that player step on the court, things get out of hand. And then you look, and sure enough, it matches what you're seeing. Like, Kevin Huerter just happened to be on the court while the entire 21-0 run lasted. So I'm going to say this. Number one, Mike Brown had replaced 3 players at one time and then 3 players at another time during the run. And he thought Kevin Huerter was playing well enough that he left him on the court. So he's the one that got beat up for the entire negative 21, right? Secondly, I went back and looked at the tape, and I don't know if you've watched it back too, Brennan. But there's one play right at the beginning of the fourth quarter where Kevin Huerter is chasing Dalton Connect through a whole bunch of like landmines. Like the Lakers are setting screens all over the place trying to get Connect open in the corner. They even, at the last second, Jackson Hayes steps up and has a perfectly clean pick on Huerter. He fights around the screen and still contests a 3-point shot, like very closely contested. So 13 seconds into the fourth quarter, Connect hits a 26-footer from the baseline. Alex Len was the one who was defending Jackson Hayes. He should have stepped out and put his hand up and made sure that 3 wasn't available, because it was a really close quarter thing and he was right there, but he didn't. So Kevin Huerter gave up 3 points right there. And you can go back and watch the play. Actually, really good defense. Like I had no problems with the defense that he had on that play. Then we have the play where LeBron James, nobody picks up LeBron James, and he just starts running at the key. And Kevin Huerter just kind of walks over and stands in the way, and LeBron runs into him, and the Lakers take the ball out of bounds, right? And then the other play with Kevin is De'Aaron Fox gets bumped off of LeBron James. They feed LeBron James in the post. Fox tries to catch up to him and fouls him for the and one. And if you remember, Kevin Huerter races out of the opposite corner and tries to do help defense and leaves Dalton Connect in the corner and gets there a smidge late, and LeBron gets the and one. Outside of those three plays, like Kevin Huerter's man didn't score, not once outside of those plays. He didn't turn the ball over once. He didn't take a single shot. He actually didn't receive a single pass in the 3 minutes and 37 seconds of the 21-0 run. He didn't do anything wrong. He just happened to be on the court when LeBron James started busting people with 28-foot threes. And so he ends up looking like a boob in the situation when realistically anyone could have been on the court and been playing his position and had this same exact plus minus. And so that's one thing I wanted to dispel. Like, I'm not a Kevin Huerter apologist. I've made it very clear that if I were coaching the Kings, Keon Ellis would have been my starter to open the season. But I want to make sure people know that, like, in that situation, I don't think Kevin Huerter did anything wrong. And in fact, I thought he was pretty solid. So, Brennan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought most of the same. I watched that stretch back at the beginning of the fourth, and honestly, I wasn't really watching for Herter specifically. I didn't realize this was a whole thing until I really opened my socials this morning. But I think the fact that he doesn't like pop is a good thing for the most part in that
Yeah.
sort of run when you're watching a 21-0 run. And it's not to say that like Keon couldn't have, mucked up the game a little bit more defensively, but that's who knows. I don't think Kevin was killing you out there or anything. And for what it's worth, you look at the main four guys and then whatever starter you want to fill in, say Kevin Huerter in 2 games, they're plus 12 in 27 minutes, 113 offensive rating, 93 defensive. People love Malik Monk, and Malik Monk has been great, by the way. Really the consistency off their bench, but core 4 guys with Malik Monk, it's a plus 14 compared to the plus 12 for Kevin, 145 offensive rating compared to 113 with Kevin, but a 110 defensive rating with Malik, 93 defensive rating through 2 games with Kevin Huerter. So I think that he's been fine. I do think there are moments where teams are still going at him a little bit, but I didn't feel like that was the case in that fourth quarter. I think that you laid it out pretty well. He just happened to be on the floor during one of the craziest runs I feel like I've seen in an NBA game. 21-0 is absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know how much there is that Kevin could have done. I think that turnovers were a big aspect during that stretch and have been a little bit throughout that whole game, along with offensive rebounds. Mike Brown mentioned it a lot post-game. 13 offensive rebounds for the Kings. That's 4 from Austin Reeves, which had to have drove him crazy, and 4 from Rui Hachimura as well. So it really felt like turnovers, offensive rebounds were the 2 things to me outside of LeBron just being LeBron freaking James that stood out as issues in that stretch. And, not once during it while I'm watching it, I'm like, they just got to get Kevin out of here.
Yeah, I didn't think so either. So Meg in the chat, I had Brendan look this up. How many deflections did Kevin have? The reason why I think we're all wondering this is because Katie kept talking about it on the broadcast. He had 6 of the Kings, 26? DeMar led was 7. So yeah, he not only that, but I think he had 2 steals, right?
Yes.
The other thing is, like, this is something weird that's happened in the first 2 games too. LeBron James didn't beat you by bull rushing the rim, running through everybody like Walter Payton and dunking on you repeatedly, because we've seen LeBron do that to the Kings multiple times during his 22 years in the league. LeBron James turned into prime Dame Lillard and started walking into 28-footers. He hit 2 28-footers and a 27-footer in that stretch. And that came after, like, in the third quarter, you remember he took the one-footed,
He did.
like, three-point attempt, which was just ridiculously lame, and you're like, "Boy, that didn't look good."
I had the same reaction. That one stuck out for sure.
It stuck out, and you're like, "Oh, boo, what was that?" And then all of a sudden, here he is, like, again, prime Dame Lillard, and I'm gonna bring this up because it actually happened in game 1 as well. Julius Randle is not a good three-point shooter. Not. He's just not. He hasn't been throughout his career. He's had a couple of seasons where he's okay, but what is he for his career?
I think
Like
33%.
33%. And all of a sudden, that dude just starts cooking and burns you for 5 of 6 from 3. I don't know what it is that makes people, again, I've talked about this self-fulfilling prophecy. You know that the Kings aren't good at defending the 3. You come into the game hyped up and thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna get a couple of threes." You have one go down, and all of a sudden you're feeling like you're on top of the world and you can just bury the Kings, right? That happens. It happens all the time. Bad three-point shooters light up the Kings. How many times last year did literally the worst three-point shooting team in the league come through and set a franchise record for threes? I think it happened twice, because once you played the Kings, you were no longer the worst three-point shooting team in the league, and someone else fell to number 30. And then when they played the Kings, they busted the Kings for a bunch of threes too. But in this case, so very specifically, you have Julius Randle and you have LeBron James, two of the biggest, strongest, mobile power forwards slash whatever you want to call them in the league. One went for 33 and one went for 32 points. Was it 14 rebounds and 10 assists? Like, how are you supposed to stop LeBron James when he's pulling up from 28 feet? And the answer is you're not. No one is. No one is going to stop him when that happens. And maybe it was something the Kings did that gave him a little confidence, but I hate to tell people this. Keegan Murray was in there getting roasted on some of those plays. Not like you were out there throwing, there was one play where Alex Len got caught on a switch and LeBron hits like a fall away 20-footer. There was one or two plays where De'Aaron Fox gets matched up or picked up LeBron coming in like full court and then got stuck on him and got, a little bit bullied. But overall, one of your best defenders or your best defender was defending the guy. And the same exact thing with Julius Randle. I'm not trying to bury Keegan Murray. I think he's done an excellent job. I think it once again highlights the biggest flaw to this roster. They don't have another Keegan Murray. And like even a defensive version that just plays defense, they don't have another one. And so it's really difficult because once these guys get going, you're torched. I mean, again, LeBron scored 16 of those 21. There's nothing that anyone in the league could do in that situation. Like,
yeah.
Anyway.
No, I'm glad you mentioned Keegan because he's an interesting wrinkle that I'm definitely monitoring this season. And I think it does kind of point to the roster construction issues that we know this team has and sort of the forward depth. But you look at that first game, like I'm wondering going into it, like, all right, who's going to guard Julius Randle here? Because last year it'd probably be HB. Keegan did a good job on Anthony Edwards in the year before. And that's the direction that they went with, actually. They put Keegan on Anthony Edwards. They go with DeMar DeRozan on Julius Randle. Thought DeRozan did okay. It was, like you said, Randle. He also did this when he was on the Knicks, by the way. He had like I want to say it's like 8 for 16, and it was his career high at the time like from
40. I think he scored 46 against the Kings.
It was crazy. At the time, it was his career high. And funnily enough, I looked it up before the last game. His career high now is actually against Minnesota while he was on the Knicks. But yeah, you kind of live with that stuff. But I think it's something that I'm definitely going to monitor going throughout the year is how often are you put in a spot where do we put Keegan? Because he's clearly the one defensively that not only on guards where we've seen him get his confidence against Steph Curry and do good there, Anthony Edwards, Devin Booker, but now it's who's guarding LeBron, who's guarding Kawhi, who's guarding Kevin Durant. And it's not like Harrison Barnes was some great option, but he had some physicality there and he's a veteran guy in this league. And now I think coming into the night, it's a very big question of who is Keegan going to guard? And that's maybe where Keon works back in a little bit because Keon's not the answer for LeBron James. He's not the answer for Julius Randle. But when you play Phoenix, do you want Keon out there for Devin Booker or Brad Beal? And then you feel more comfortable putting Keegan on Kevin Durant. So defensively, Keegan is the one I really look at as how are we going to tackle this tonight? Because he is clearly the number one in that aspect.
Yeah, and that's how we bring the conversation full circle right there, Brennan. Like it's confusing how this is all going to work out, but number one, again, I'll just keep saying it. The Kings need somebody else. Like and it's not again, I don't think it's Kyle Kuzma. Like even if they had Dorian Finney-Smith, I think that they would be perfectly fine defensively. They don't have another guy who can go in and play against these guys. And you talked about the offensive rebounds, right? We could probably go back on the tape and look at the offensive rebounds and see how many times it was Kevin Huerter's fault that Austin Reeves got an offensive rebound. That might have happened a couple of times. But also the problem is when a team goes big, and like the Lakers do to start the game with Rui Hachimura and LeBron James, how do the Kings match up? They don't. That's the problem. They don't match up at all. And that's why you started seeing the offensive rebounds. When the Kings went small, Rui Hachimura just kept going inside and snatching offensive rebounds. And that's going to be like a theme to this. Now, I would like to tell you that not every team in the league has multiple big guys that can do this, but it's just not the case. Like every team in the league has multiple big guys. And like I don't know what it is that the Kings are going to have to do here to figure it out because without like switching out a specific type of player or without Trey Lyles like getting healthy and then just being better defensively than he has been throughout his career. He's solid defensively, but he's not great. I mean, I think a regular, everyday, solid Trey Lyles could have given you good minutes against Rui or even against LeBron for a small stretch, but he's just not there yet physically. But I still think you're right, man. It's how do you get Keon Ellis back in the rotation? Can you use Kevin Huerter as like a 2-3 as opposed to just a 2, which is what they've been doing? And like, how do you like wedge him back into the rotation? Because that's for me the way that the Kings defense gets better, and I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, and even then, I wonder how much better we're really talking about. I guess they were 9th in defensive rating post All-Star break last year. Encouraging stuff there, but when it comes down to it, this team I still think needs to make their money on the offensive end, and you would think putting up 127 is enough. So you still got to be passable defensively, obviously. But once you start hitting a little bit more threes and the flow of this, we mentioned Kevin and Trey getting back into their typical rhythm and shape. I think things will start to clear up, but it's everything. Does this not feel like the exact same thing as the last like 2 seasons where we're like, this is a great offensive team. There's a lot going on, but what's the defense going to look like? What the heck is going on with the forward depth? It's kind of the same stuff.
You know why it matters? It matters because when you score 127 points, you shouldn't lose. I mean, that's why it matters. Like
Yeah.
the Kings can't string enough stops together yet in order to keep up in some of these situations. And I think the games have been really good. I think they're back and forth, but there's always a point where another team gets a stop and your team doesn't. And like, look, just straight up, Anthony Davis is a better defender than anyone on the Kings. Like Keegan Murray is a very good defender. Anthony Davis is a great defender. And then when you go back to the Minnesota game, like they do have the like 4-time defensive player of the year manning the post, right? And not only that, but they have Jaden McDaniels, who's an absolutely tremendous defender. And so you've got to find ways to get better, like at those to go up against these teams. But Minnesota was number 1 in the league in defense last year. They were unbelievable. They were better defensively than the Celtics. Their defensive rating is like 108.4 and the Celtics was like 110.6. And like they were absolutely spectacular defensively. And I really don't think they lose all that much when Cat is swapped out for Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo, who again is a very good defender. So you scored 115 against a really good defensive team. Maybe they don't have all their rotations down yet, and you're able to get over on them a little bit. But still, like that's how the Kings are going to take a step forward. Like, sure, offensively, they can keep getting better and better offensively, but if they can't stop anybody, like you don't want to start like get to the point where it's like a 140 to 135 game. That's not a good look either.
Yeah. And so far, it kind of seems what we're in for. It's again early, but the same way, like like I think you pointed out well that you're scoring well against good defenses last year. Still, that is expected to carry over into this season. Those were also two pretty bad offenses last year, and they scored good enough to keep up with you, and even
Yes.
more so, obviously. So, yeah, definitely on both sides there, and some things to iron out. But luckily, you got Blazers, you got Jazz, Hawks, Raptors, Heat, Raptors coming up. So a stretch here where you might be able to get right and calm everybody down, fix Kevin Huerter's plus minus.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're talking about what, the next 6 games? Is that what you just said? It is, because the 4-game road trip, they come back to play Toronto. You add the Blazers game in. So the next 6 games, they are very, very winnable games. And like all of them, like the Heat aren't playing all that well. They're a bit of a hot mess. That's again a defensive team. They can't really score. But I like for my money, like, having conversations with people within the walls, right? Whether it's coaches or it's players or whatever. I think a few of them are like they understand that like 5-5 or 6-4 in the first 10 was totally on the table. Like they understood that they were going to have issues because of the fact that they didn't have a bunch of like, what is it, like 30% of their rotation for the entire preseason. They got it. Like, what do we do here? And the answer is, you just try to gut it out and you try to do the best you can to get through the stretch, and hope that you don't pick up too many losses in the meantime. But I don't feel like this team, like at two losses, 0-2, that anyone should be panicking, especially when you lost by a total of 6 points.
Yeah, no reason to panic. I think typical ironing things out. I know that there were concerns with Mike Brown's rotations previously. I think more often than not, I've pointed towards, well, what is he supposed to do with this roster construction? And the Keon thing goes beyond that, but I'm still very much, let's give this some time, guys. And, it doesn't seem like everybody's at Mike Brown's head right now. I would say that there's no like losing the locker room sense going on. We're way too early for these conversations. And he has been a great coach since his time in Sacramento. Unanimous coach of the year, if people didn't forget long ago. Now I know you want to talk about Dwayne Casey, Nick Nurse, guys getting fired right after, whatever. I think that everybody needs to just take a chill pill, relax on Mike Brown, on Kevin Huerter, give it a little bit of time for these guys to try to gel a little bit more before we're jumping in conclusions or jumping off whatever.
Yeah, and I'm going to pull up like this statement by Nate Dogg, and this doesn't call you out, Nate Dogg. I heard this on Twitter like 14 times. I actually had, I think, 3 people after the season opener say in my Twitter feed, fire Mike Brown. But I'm just going to pull it up right here, and I'm going to like, I'm wondering, what exactly did you want him to do in the fourth quarter? Because I looked at his quote after the game, and his quote after the game was very specific. Like, look, I guess maybe I could have called a second timeout. And I think people would go, oh, look, they went on a 14-0 run. Actually, I kept hearing they went on a 21-0 run and Mike Brown didn't call a timeout. No, he called a timeout when it was 14-0. He also replaced 3 players at that point. And then he replaced 3 players again during the run. And there was also the and 1. So the game stopped like during the run, during the 14-0, the game stopped because LeBron got the and 1. And so there was a free throw. Anyway, my point is, like, if you want Mike Brown to just call like timeout, 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 and then you get to the end of the game and somehow your team is battled back like they did, and you don't have a timeout and can't stop the clock, or B, you don't have a timeout and you can't review a play because you don't have a timeout, then everyone's pissed because he took too many timeouts. Right. So like there's
even like you have 1 left and it's like, we're a little unsure on this review and we don't want to use it because what if we lose it?
Yeah. So I would also say the funny thing I think people need to know is that Mike doesn't typically make the decision he makes the ultimate decision on whether he's going to review a play or not, but it's usually Luke Laux, who I believe is usually working with like somebody else, right?
Robbie Lemons, I think.
Yeah, so they have somebody with a iPad sitting there, like, watching the play again and again and again, saying whether or not you should review it or not. But Luke is the one that says either, like, no, let's not review it, or let's review the play. And then Mike usually makes a decision. He tries to keep the emotion out of it and let people make the decision, and not just listen to, like, Domantas Sabonis tell him every time that he didn't foul anyone when he clearly fouled somebody almost every single time. So that's part of it. And then, Brendan, I think because they're 0-2, and because, they had this weird situation where they gave up a 21-0 run, I think a lot of the good has been missed. And I think it's something that you were touching on early with Keegan. I think what we've seen from Keegan Murray is just absolutely spectacular. I think the one issue, if I have any issue with what happened in the fourth quarter last night, is that he wasn't assertive enough, and his teammates didn't, like, pull their head out of their ass and find him. Because Keegan has become, like, an extremely valuable weapon for this team. And to have him go, like, I don't know what it was, I'll look it up, but the second half, at the first, during the first half, Keegan Murray had 11 points on 4 of 7 shooting. In the third quarter, he was 1 of 3 for 3 points. And in the fourth quarter, he didn't score. He was 0 for 1 in 10 minutes in the fourth quarter, 0 for 1 from 3, and did not score at all. Like, I think that they tend to forget about him on occasion. And again, a little bit of that is on Keegan. He needs to go in there and demand that, or go up and just take somebody else's spot up at the top of the key and start running those plays. But I would still say he's been a tremendous bright spot through the first 2 games.
I would say he definitely has. It's cliche, but he's definitely that clear X factor on this team. We're seeing him get to the line a little bit more. We saw it even more so in the preseason, but not much, but it's progress. 2 in each of the games, these first 2, after he averaged, I want to say it's a little over 1 throughout the entire course of last season. He gets 17 shots in that game against the Wolves. He ends up with just 11 in that Lakers game, like you kind of laid out, that second half really slowing down. But defensively, I mean, I think we're continuing to see the strides. And one of the big efforts was, like we kind of mentioned earlier, with HB gone, all right, Keegan, you're going to be asked to guard bigger players. And I think that he got a little bit more physical for preparing for that coming into this year. And I think you're seeing it on the offensive end too. I think that he's using his size and weight a bit more to go into guys as he's going up, more just willing to play through physicality on both ends of the floor. But each passing game, it's more and more so like, all right, this guy is one of the most important aspects of this team when it really comes down to it. It's a big 4, big 5. If you want to throw Malik in there, like, there's 5 guys on this team that all feel like they could change the tide of anything on any given night. And Keegan is absolutely one of those. Their most important defender. I think the next step still, and this is year 3, it'll come over time. You could see gradual progress throughout this year, but his kind of playmaking when he does drive, finding the open guys, spraying out to shooters, I think would be the next level in his development. But he's doing everything out there, and there's no replacement for him either, is one of the toughest parts, like we kind of talked about. So I've been really encouraged by what he's done, and the offense pretty much as a whole, I would say, for the Kings, but specifically Keegan on both ends of the floor. It feels like, just another step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think he's been absolutely spectacular. And then I think the other guy who's been spectacular is Domantas Sabonis. Like, again, Keegan Murray is indispensable to this team at this point. Like, his ability to defend multiple positions, but also to go for 20 something almost any single night. And he's your best 3-point shooter realistically at this point. He's a player you can't live without, and you need to find, different versions of, but you need to find more of players like that. But then I think, again, Sabonis has been just absolutely tremendous. He scored 29 points on 14 shots last night. He went 8 of 9 from the free throw line. Like, he's just, like, every single game. I think game 1 was a little weird because he didn't have any assists and he didn't get the double-double. But even in that game, what did he go, 3 for 4 from 3? Like, you're asking him to shoot the 3. He's like, okay. Yeah, I just, what he's been able to do early to start the season has just been, for me, is like really, really stunning. I do think Fox has got off to a little bit of a slow start, but I see him trying to set up his teammates and trying to figure out like where he can support and then sort of take off, when he can get his moments, but there's too many players for him to have too many moments. And like, I still feel him like there's this balance that he's fighting, which I thought he was a little bit better, a little more aggressive, and his 3-point shot started falling. But overall, I think again you need a little bit more consistency from him. And I think something that's been hidden a little bit in the first 2 games is he's been really good defensively. At least
Mhm.
that's what it looks like. So, I mean, look at the opposing point guard play over the first 2 games. And I mean, D'Angelo Russell is like a bona fide Kings killer throughout his career. And he finished with 16 points last night on 3 of 11. But he really did feel like one of the lesser, sort of offensive weapons that were happening. And I don't know. I think he's been solid defensively, to go with, pretty decent offensively, but we expect him to score more type deal.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think that he's also had those wraps on his fingers,
Mhm.
which stands out to me a little bit. He's always a guy that's just going to say, I'm fine, which I actually appreciate, that he's just going to play through whatever. But in game one, kind of saw him like shaking it after it got hit a little bit or wincing a little bit in that game yesterday against the Lakers. But I think he's always been a guy that seems like he can just turn it on and just get buckets whenever he wants, really. And to sort of what you laid out, that he kind of tries to integrate everybody early in the season and early in games, even on like a quarter basis. But Domas's aggressiveness has definitely stood out. I've been very skeptical on what him shooting more threes is going to look like. But you go 3 of 4 in that first game, you go 1 of 3 in the second. Like, that's a fine balance. It doesn't feel like they all feel within the flow of the offense, which I think has been encouraging. And that Lakers run in the fourth happened when Domas sat. I think is also a part of it. The offensive rebounds, the physicality as a whole when it comes to the Kings and setting the tone on that end. I think there's definitely a parallel there. But the other positive that I would highlight and mentioned a little bit earlier is just this free throw shooting. Like, this really stands out to me as something that could be a new aspect of this Kings team. Already had guys that were good at it, and obviously you're adding DeMar, but you get 35 free throw attempts in that first game. Again, 25 in the second, and you only had 35 or more attempts 3 times throughout all of last season. So I think their ability to sort of reset things by getting to the free throw line, converting them. DeMar missed, I want to say, 2 of his first 4 in Golden One Center, and I was like, oh God, is he a king and he can't hit him now? No, still ends up knocking him down.
12
But
of 14, right? Something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
ended up doing all right. Yeah, exactly, 12 of 14. So I think that aspect of getting to the free throw line and just having this dynamic offense, really, of, again, I think there's 5 guys that really can drop 30 on any given night, and you can spread the wealth between them. You have 2 or 3 20-point guys in the first game. You have 2 guys drop. You have 3 20-point guys in the second game. So I think there is dynamic aspects to this offense that are encouraging an individual growth, but defense needs to be cleaned up, and Michael Brown's got to get a better feel for what night in and night out rotations are going to look like.
Yeah. The free throw thing is funny. The Kings are 50 of 60 in the first 2 games. They're fourth in free throw makes, fifth in free throw attempts. And the Sacramento Kings are shooting 83.3% from the free throw line and lead the NBA in free throw percentage. Didn't think we'd
Wow.
see that even after. I didn't think we'd see that over a 2-game stretch at any point in the entire season.
Dead
But
last year with 74.5. So Domas is the one that stood out to me a little bit. Nothing crazy from the free throw line, but like you mentioned, going that, what was it, 8 of 9 against the Lakers? That's a great night from Domas at the line in my mind.
oh yeah, yeah. Just looking at the stats so far, it's interesting too. It's always fun because it's such a small sample size, but the big 5, as you called them, um, Sabonis is leading at 26.5 points per game. DeMar DeRozan is at 24.5 points per game. De'Aaron Fox is at 21.5. We got Keegan Murray at 18.5, and Malik Monk, who's been extremely consistent, is at 15.5 points per game. and then it falls off from there. You got Kevin Huerter at 8 points per game, Trey Lyles at 4 points per game, and then I think the biggest problem is that after you get past even that, Keon Ellis 2 points per game, Alex Lim 1.5 points per game, and McDermott and McLaughlin haven't scored. There's no depth to the scoring at this point in the season, which is partially because Mike Brown is running everybody out there for between 38 and 43 minutes. But yeah, again, I think he's doing what he has to do, what he feels like he has to do. I don't know if it's what he has to do. Like we'll figure it out in the end if this works to play your starters a ton and make sure that they're figuring out themselves and like learning how to play as a group. And then like slowly integrating people. But either way, I think he's doing what he believes is the best to try to get that sort of ironed out. You guys, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Reed Rods, he asked, did Fox force shots last night dribbling towards a crowd? I don't know. Like I remember his the baseline jumper that he missed, which looked identical to the baseline jumper that Keon Ellis missed in the first game, which actually led to like a bad run. That was one thing. He pulled up from 17, was wide open, and pulled up from 11 twice during the run and missed them both. I didn't think he necessarily ran into too much of a crowd. I mean, he's been really good assist wise. I think if anyone that I felt like forced a couple of shots, uh, it was DeMar DeRozan in the first 2 games. And again, he's playing on a new team, trying to figure out how he belongs, and he's trying to make an impact and trying to lead and trying to win and trying to do the things that you would hope that he would do.
Yeah, I would say for Fox, specifically in that Lakers game, it wasn't a great showing. Like you look at 6 turnovers, 3 of 10 from 3 stands out to me too. I think that, there were 2 of those, like we mentioned, into the third that were big momentum shift. But for the most part, I think you'd like that shot selection to be a little less like it was last year and more, let's get to the rim a little bit more, where Fox's elite skill really is, but it's the Lakers. It's Anthony Davis sitting there waiting for you at the rim. And their perimeter defense is so bad that you can kind of create some perimeter looks from De'Aaron's perspective. So I definitely think that he could have been better in that one. And I would probably say shot selection and turnovers a little bit would be kind of what stood out to me there. But I'm not necessarily going to sit here and pin it all on him either.
Yeah, I would like to see like what this team looks like after 5 games, after 10 games. Again, because I think the shot selection and that kind of stuff that we've seen from DeRozan and from Fox, it'll clear itself up as they become more like accustomed to playing with each other. Like preseason or like working out in training camp and stuff, that's one thing, but once you're in it and, every possession starts to matter and stuff like that, I think there is like a give and take that has to be almost like worked out between the players, whether it's verbal or it's nonverbal. Like there has to be moments where it's like, hey, I've got this one, I'm going to take it home. And other games where you're like, okay, like this is a bit of trouble. Like they're still like kind of butting heads, even though they're not butting heads on the court and not saying anything negative to each other or anything. You can kind of feel like their play styles are not working together for moments, and that'll clear itself up. It's just a matter of trying to just getting more minutes together. Let's see. I know a few people thought I was making excuses. I'm not sure what exactly excuses we've made here.
It's 2 games, guys. Like it's
2
just
games.
contextualizing, really. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's 2 games, and like again, they've lost by 6 points. And again, I always bring this up. Like my friend Paul Westfall, the late great Paul Westfall, used to say there are reasons and there are excuses. The reason why Trey Lyles and Kevin Huerter don't look like they fit is because they haven't fit in. They haven't been there. They haven't been able to play. Like if we get 6, 8, 10 games in and they still don't look like they fit, there's no more excuses. You got to move on. You got to go either find other players or you got to give other players chances, all that stuff. So anyway, like you've got to we do have to like let this team show us who they are. And so far, 2 highly competitive games against, I hate to tell people this, a team that won 56 games last year
Right.
and a Lakers team that finished ahead of them in the standings. Like, the Lakers aren't a horrible team. They're not like the build of that team, and they're what, 3-0 on the season?
Yeah, their offense
They're
looks really good under JJ right now.
yeah, yeah. So, um, what I don't know what you're asking about a broken pinky, Meg, but, we've asked about the tape. I know Jason Anderson asked about the tape on his hand, and, and basically, like, the team has just said, "Oh, it's nothing." And
Right.
I think it happened, I think it happened, like, in shoot-around on opening night because, like, we hadn't seen tape on his hand before, and then all of a sudden he came out for warm-ups, and he had tape on his left hand, which is not good. I have no idea what it is that they're, what it is that's going on there. How about I'm gonna send this to Brendan. What do you think, Brendan?
Eric says, "Are we underrating these Warriors Lakers team? They both look good." I would say that the Warriors are the one that I'm a little curious about. Buddy Hield, it kind of feels, I don't know if you've seen like the circle chart of the typical Buddy Hield experience where a new team gets him and they're like, oh my God, this guy's really good. And then he has some slip ups and it's like, oh, I don't know about this. Should he be playing that much? And eventually it's like, all right, maybe we're going to move on. And we're early in the cycle on the Warriors side.
The
And
80% isn't gonna hold? Is that what you're
yeah,
saying, Brendan?
um, I will say I do think that the free flowing offense that the Warriors run is really good for his shooting ability. Obviously, he is a track star out there, but he runs in laps in the half court, similar to Kevin Huerter, and knocks down stuff off movement really well. But you get to close games. What are the turnovers going to look like that we've seen Buddy Hield? Is the defense going to rear its head? So I'm not huge on the Warriors. I would say I'm higher on the Lakers. Like I mentioned, I think that JJ's offense has looked pretty dynamic. I like what they're doing with AD being extremely aggressive when he's on. He's one of the best players in the league and in genuine like MVP conversations. So I think that the Lakers have a lot going for them. The Warriors, I'm still skeptical because I think a lot rides on Kuminga, and I'm not sure where I stand there. I guess we'll say.
Okay, so, I'm looking at Buddy Hield's stats for the first 2 games with the Golden State Warriors. First and foremost, Buddy is averaging 24.5 points per game in 17.5 minutes per game. So if I scroll down to his per 36 numbers, just for the sake of,
Mhm.
the discussion here, Buddy is averaging 50.4 points, 9.3 rebounds, and 7.2 assists per 36. And in his 36 minutes per game, if he were playing 36, he would be averaging 12.3 3-point makes and 16.5 attempts per game. Buddy is shooting a whopping 75% from 3 on 8 attempts per game. He's shooting 69.2% from the field, and his effective field goal percentage is 92.3. So, um,
Seems sustainable.
it does not seem sustainable even in the least bit. And so, so look, I will say this though, like I'm always hard on Buddy Hield. I had to cover Buddy Hield for a long time, and there were some major highs, some major lows with Buddy. And he was always a nice guy, never a problem with Buddy, but like some of the play on the court, like it wears on you, right? But I will also tell you this: Buddy is one of the top. This is my 15th season covering the Kings. Top 5 hardest workers ever, and maybe even higher than that. Like Buddy Hield is a workaholic. He can run all day long. If you sent Buddy out for a marathon, I have no doubt that Buddy would finish the marathon and probably be able to do like a 10K right afterwards. Like the dude works tirelessly. So the fact that he's hitting all of his threes, he's a great 3-point shooter, man. He's one of the great 3-point shooters that we've ever seen in the league. Like, and part of that's because there weren't as many 3-point shots in the past. But just go look and see Buddy Hield's career stats. I mean, he was the all-time leader in 3-point makes after his second, third, and fourth season, like cumulatively. over those seasons, and it's probably even his 5th season. Like, Buddy Hield will go down as a top 10, like, 3-point make player of all time. And so, yeah, is he playing well right now? Okay. But, like, let's see what happens when the games get difficult. And I also, like, I don't know how long Steve Kerr can play 12 guys.
Right.
Like, it's Hubie Brown used to do that all the time. But I think, again, he has 12 guys that kind of, of the 12 guys, 10 of them are, 3rd season or more. And that's a good problem to have. So I don't think Mike Brown has 12 guys that have been playing that long. He probably has 11. No, because I can't even count Keon Ellis as one of those guys.
Right.
So you would basically be looking at Doug McDermott and, maybe 10 guys. So I don't even think they could do it. Let's see. Do you guys have any other questions? This is a good question. Salvador, Brenden, what do you got for me on this one?
Yeah, are the Kings trying to bring value of Huerter to trade him? The typical showcasing question.
Showcase.
I am going to bet no. I think that there are instances where, ulterior motives go into lineup decisions. I would not expect that to be the case currently. I think Mike Brown is trying to win games. And there's a lot of people all the time that are like, I don't understand Mike Brown's loyalty to Kevin Huerter. And I try to always say the 3-point shooting, the movement in the half court is extremely valuable for this team. And one of the things they want to do more than anything is run. Kevin Huerter runs. He's 6'7" at the 2 guard, not great defensively, but that size does matter. So I think that Mike is genuinely just trying to go with the same group, obviously replacing Harrison with DeMar, and see how this works. I don't think there's aspects of trying to build his value necessarily. Now, I will say that if Devin Carter comes back pre-trade deadline and you see you have something there, big if, that then I think that we could talk about Kevin Huerter trade conversations again. I think they will resurface at some point down the line, but I don't think that anything rotationally decision-wise going on right now has anything to do with that.
I would agree with you 100%. Yeah, I at a certain point, like, they could trade Kevin Huerter. That's not out of the realm of possibility. He's the most movable contract that they have. That, like, if you put all of the contracts out there, like the 17 million this year and like 18.5 next year is movable, and it's movable for a tier of player that you would kind of look for if you're the Kings. And maybe one team is just looking to move off of a contract because a guy doesn't fit what they're doing anymore, and maybe they need shooting and you need defense, whatever it might be. Yeah, but I think at this point, like, Mike is trying to make sure that he has his core stabilized, and Kevin Huerter is still part of that core because he's an electric 3-point shooter when he's on. Let's see. This is a good question, Michael Gallery. What even players would fit with this Kings team? And to be honest, Meg answers it because is something that I say all the time. They could really use a Bobby Portis, like a mean MFer who shoots a 3, rebounds, blocks shots, plays crazy defense, and intimidates the hell out of everyone, including like small children that see him on TV. Like, Bobby Portis is badass, and he would really, really help a team like the Kings, in my opinion. But I think there are other players like that. Like, I don't know. Who else?
Yeah, it's smaller, but like the Thunder have a bit of a logjam. Like an Aaron Wiggins, I think could be helpful for this Kings team. Do you reach a point where Keldon Johnson is a conversation when it comes to the Spurs, for example? We've done, like, is Grant Williams in Charlotte? Does he fit that a little bit in sort of the Bobby Portis idea? And you never know what's going to come up. Like, we could reach a point middle of the year where all of a sudden Jimmy Butler becomes available, and I don't know that I love his fit necessarily on this Kings team. But you never know who's going to actually become available until we're at that point, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, man. Like, For my money, like we can try to like rope in as many players as we want here, right? But the problem that I always have with this team is like they need another guy that's built like Keegan Murray. And he doesn't have to play exactly like Keegan Murray. He needs to play defense, but they need 6'8", 6'9". They do not need another 6'5", 6'6" guy who they hope can play up. That's just like for my money, it's a problem. And especially like you brought up Devin Carter. There's probably a point where Devin Carter will be like a major part of this rotation, whether it's next year, the year after, or whatever. But like if you're going to start Devin Carter in the backcourt alongside De'Aaron Fox, you have to know that Devin Carter's like 6'1", right? Like you need the other guys that can play defense behind them that are bigger. And Devin Carter's a very good defensive player and he's got long arms and all that stuff, but that doesn't make up for the fact that he's undersized. If he's playing the two, if he's a backup point guard, that's fine. But if he's starting at a 2 or something, and you're starting like 6'1" and 6'3", that's not great. I mean, it's part of the reason why Kevin Huerter at 6'7" is starting, because
Yep.
it gives you some size in the backcourt. I mean, Kevin Huerter is taller than DeMar DeRozan. And so, yeah, I really do think that the Kings need that style of player. But like having, it's hard to get all of it in one player, right? So I think the Kings could use a defender, a shooter, a shot blocker, and a tough guy. Like, and that's why I laugh about Bobby Portis, because I think Bobby Portis might be the one guy who can fit all of those things, but he's also on a team that probably believes that they're a championship contender.
Right.
And so how do you get that guy? And I don't know. Like,
Maybe it's like Cam Johnson, but like the guy you described is like talking like Chet Holmgren and Cooper Flag,
Oh yeah, give me Chet Holmgren. I told everybody
Yeah.
that year that Chet Holmgren is the perfect fit next to
Yep.
Domantas Sabonis, and then you're seeing what he does. He passes, he rebounds, he blocks shots. He's a great defender and can defend up and down. Like he
Yep.
can defend some threes. He definitely can defend the 4, and he can defend the 5. Yeah, like absolutely phenomenal type of player. And then like there are other guys like I think Jabari Smith Jr. will develop into a player. I think, while I don't love Jaren Jackson Jr. as a player overall, mainly because I can't imagine being 6'11" and averaging 5 rebounds a game. I just think that that's like the most disgusting thing that I've ever seen. Like I'm being mean, but like there's no way he should be averaging that, especially when last season he was still right around there and they had nobody else to rebound at all.
Right.
It's like, what are we doing here? You know, but I do think that there are players out there that could help the Kings. And I also think that if we look at the DeMar DeRozan addition and how Keegan Murray's playing, you are looking for probably a different player today than you were 3 months ago, 4 months ago for this Kings team. Like there's a point where Kyle Kuzma made a lot of sense for this team, or Brandon Ingram made a lot of sense for this team. I don't think that's so much the case anymore, unless you're looking at long term and like what you're going to be in 3 to 5 years, and building out a younger type team. Even though like Kuzma's not that young, but does that make sense, Brendan?
Yeah, definitely. You need a little bit more defense. You kind of just need you have your creators. Just fill a role. I think a little bit on the offensive end and find a way to be impactful defensively. They need size, physicality, and a little bit of a little shit to them, really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do. I still think that the physicality thing is something that the Kings need. And also like the sort of the mean guy. So, but I'm also intrigued by some of the young players. I just know that in order for any of the young players to play, you need everything else to be working before
Right.
you can do that. And you can say, well, why did like they threw Doug McDermott in the opener? Because Doug McDermott is a veteran. He knows how to play the game and he knows exactly where to be. And you're searching for different combinations of players and stuff. Um, I still like I'm not going to be able to wrap my head, or as Mike says, wrap my arms fully around how Keon Ellis isn't part of the rotation at this point. But I still do. I kind of get get the concept of shrinking down his rotations, because I've seen Mike do this before. But Mike's the 9th head coach I've covered in Sacramento, and so many other head coaches do this. It's not like Mike is some, obscure, he's trying something weird that no one else has done. Like lots of people do this. They shrink down their rotations.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
Keon is definitely the one to me. I think we'll get some answers tomorrow a little bit on what was going on there and how he decides to, whether or not he decides to keep that up a little bit moving forward with this next game. Is it Utah tomorrow, right? Am I remembering that right?
No, Portland tomorrow.
Portland,
right. Utah on Tuesday, back to back. One of the worst back-to-backs where you got to fly to Utah.
I hear flying into Utah sucks. I've gone there once, and everybody talks about how steep it is going in and out of there.
It's not fun. Yeah, it feels like you're falling out of the sky, and then boom, you hit the ground. You're like, oh, that was wild. Yeah, it's really high in elevation too, but it doesn't. It feels like a very rough plane ride. Okay, so we took all those questions. We're gonna make that the business of basketball. If you guys have any last second questions, throw them out there. If not, I think we're gonna go to final thoughts. Brenden, what do you got for final thoughts?
I need the Yankees to get their shit together because nobody wants to watch the Dodgers win this. I will say that as much as I hate the Dodgers, Freddie Freeman's walk-off grand slam was badass. That was a very cool moment just within sports. And I hope Shohei's healthy. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun watching that. And I have Frankie in my mind every single at-bat because I know he is just freaking out as a huge Yankees fan. But the one other thing I'll say is I almost went to the Rod Wave concert last night at Golden One Center. I don't know if you saw any of the videos from some of that stuff, James. Or maybe it was the night before, actually, not last night.
Yeah, Friday night, right?
Yeah. And I guess somebody let off fireworks in Doco. And it sounded like it might be something else. And it
sounded like gunfire.
Yep. And it just kind of commenced this whole panic that went on, and everybody in lines rushes in the doors. And I just hope everybody's good. I would imagine mentally that could be a lot to deal with. I couldn't imagine like being there and then just kind of going the next day to games like it's all nothing. It was just a very weird scene to see a lot of videos of Golden One. And then even inside, people were kind of freaking out, hopping over the counters where concessions are and like stealing drinks and stuff. And I'm like, guys, it's a chaotic situation. I hope everybody's good and mentally able to kind of just move on from that best they can. But just a chaotic situation. And it was super weird to see, when your news gets a little too local, I guess, and you're like, oh my God, this is going crazy at Golden One right now. Just think interior, everything could have been handled a little bit better, but also hope that everybody worked out everything okay in that very chaotic and out of nowhere situation.
Yeah, I'm hoping no one got injured. Because like when you're pushing your way into doors and, there are security guards there and there are people trying, like they can get squished against doors and stuff like that. So I'm hoping that everyone's okay. I saw the videos of it, very scary, and I get it. Like we live in a weird society where you have to worry about things like that, which is a bunch of bullshit. Just to be honest, it's horrible that we have to worry about that stuff all the time. And seeing people out in the Doco, which I walk through, 8 times a week, going to and from the car, sometimes 15 times a week. Yeah, seeing everybody diving on the ground and stuff, that's scary stuff, and I hate to see it. Yeah, so hopefully everyone is okay. Hopefully no one got hurt and all that stuff in sort of the ensuing chaos of the moment. Yeah, it was weird seeing some people laying on the ground, other people like not understanding what's going on and just kind of walking. It was just like very strange, sort of surreal. So I'm glad you weren't there, Brenden, for that, because I'm sure that would not have been super fun. And then every time you go there, you would have been thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, weird. As someone who was here for all the Stephon Clark stuff, things got crazy a couple of times where, we were blockaded into the arena. And like one night, I think 3,000 fans had been let in before sort of protest broke out. And then all of a sudden, a whole bunch of Kings fans and a whole bunch of protesters are mixed together outside. And the Kings had no choice but to lock the doors. And then that was it. We had a basketball game with 3,000 fans in the building because everybody else was locked outside, which is never a good thing because you're also locking your fans outside in what could be, a not very safe situation.
Right.
Just because tempers were flaring and everything else. So luckily, I don't think anything bad happened, but that happened twice and it was very weird. Especially one time they were like up against the glass, like the protesting was up against the glass, and again the Kings had nothing to do with any of that, but the whole front of that building is glass.
Right.
So if there were guns, like there was concern the other night, then you worry about the people coming inside the building very quickly, like if there are weapons, because it's all just glass. I don't think it's all bulletproof glass. Maybe I'm wrong.
Right.
But I've never seen a window break out there either. So maybe there is something to that. Cool. Okay. Final thoughts for me. Pulling for my guy Sean. There's nothing worse than moving. I never want to move again in my entire life. And like I've been in my house for like 10 years, and I don't want to move. I know Brenden, you probably will move again here because you're in that age where you move all the time.
Probably mid-season.
Moving sucks. Moving is horrible, and I hate it. So shout out to our guy Sean, who's spending his weekend moving. And let's see, what else do we got? I don't know. Keep your head on, Kings fans. This isn't panic time at all. They played 2 highly competitive games. They had a weird anomaly in one game where a team went off for 21 points, and they still got it to within 2 with 57 seconds left in the game. This team is showing that they at least can fight and they can put up points, and they have some holes they need to figure out and everything else. But at the end of the day, it's early. It's super early, and they're not the only team that has had a couple of strange starts to the season. This is kind of like early season basketball, and you wouldn't expect them to be at the bottom at 0-2 in the Western Conference, but they're tied with the Denver Nuggets at 0-2. They're tied with the Philadelphia 76ers at 0-2. And then there's a bunch of bad teams that I could also tell you who they're tied with.
Yeah, not gonna lie. I was looking at it. I was like, wait, these teams all kind of suck.
They're tied with the Jazz. They're tied with Portland. They're tied with, Detroit's 0-3, not just 0-2.
Yeah.
Brooklyn 0-2, Philly 0-2, Washington 0-2. I expect them to be like a 25-win team at the most. That's an ugly team. So yeah, they haven't quite figured it all out yet. But also it's not an excuse that they don't have a rhythm right now. There's a reason why they don't have a rhythm right now, and it's because 2 of the 7 players that are playing just did not get to play at all in the preseason or training camp or anything else. We got anything else? I don't know. I think we're good. I don't think that there are many questions here. Yeah.
Appreciate everybody hopping in as always. Play Keon Ellis, Mike. Play some Keon Ellis. Played well last year. I think he deserves it. Get him some run.
I think I feel the same. I think he deserves it, but I want to know. I want to see him figure out what it was that made him get on the court last year, because for whatever reason he hasn't looked like the same player to me. 100%. Aggressive, but overly aggressive, a step slow, and just overall I need him to look more like the player that I think was tremendous last year. And there can be a lot of factors to this, but it could also be that he continues to add weight and bulk up and try to be stronger, and he could just be dealing with some of that his body's different and he needs to work through it and lean down and stuff like that. So we'll see.
Yeah, I know he was working really hard in the offseason to attempt to prove that he deserves to keep that starting spot. So it's not for a lack of effort, but I think the process and results can be a little bit different than the effort put in at all times.
Yeah, and I'm hoping he doesn't get too bummed out by what's happened here and kind of lose the focus that he had. So, all right, cool. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the KINGSBEAT podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you don't mind, give us a thumbs up, give us a rating review, jump on board with the KINGSBEAT, become a premium subscriber, do all of those things. We're trying to get to 5,000 subscribers here on YouTube. That would be amazing. But thanks for joining us here on a Sunday afternoon. So for Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast and myself, James Ham, Kings Insider for ESPN 1320. Thanks for joining us here on the KINGSBEAT podcast. We'll see you very soon, and Sean will be back.